Alright guys, and welcome back. Right, in today's episode I want to get this Vauxhall Nova a little bit more finished. So I've got lots of little loose ends and little bits of wiring and bits and bobs to do, so I'm just going to start cracking on. Right guys, so I'm just doing a bit more wiring on this Nova conversion. Now this is the original Nova loom here. We've got 5 wires, so I just wanted to make things a little bit clearer for you guys if you're doing this at home. So the black with red trace goes to the starter motor. Now that's the little exciter wire which makes the starter motor crank. This blue wire, slightly green tinge to it, goes, well, it would have gone to the original coolant temperature sensor wire. Now we don't need that anymore because the C20LET loom has one built in. So we can ditch that. This blue wire with green trace goes to the oil pressure switch. This blue with white trace, that goes to the alternator. And again, that makes the alternator work. So that clamps to it. If that's not on, the alternator will not work. And finally, we've got a black with a yellow wire, which I believe is maybe something for the automatic choke. Not sure. It's got an ignition feed to it when the ignition's on. But again, we don't need that, so that can be trimmed back. So as you can see, I've cut these 2 wires back, staggered the cuts, and I've also put heat shrink over the end and just flattened it. So when it's hot, it just squishes together and it just sticks together. Makes it nice and watertight. Now I can wrap the loom up with some loom tape and jobs are good. So I'm now moving on to the battery cables. The original Nova Earths were in pretty poor condition and the battery lead from the starter motor to the battery wasn't quite long enough, so I had to do something about it. I used 16mm square cable to make a new negative terminal loom. I crimp the connectors and cover them with a 4:1 glue type heat shrink. This gives a really modern factory finish. The crimping tool I'm using is hydraulic and clamps the terminals effortlessly. My advice is to make sure your fingers are well clear, as this thing is taking no prisoners. I find a cheap heat gun is just the right temperature to shrink the heat shrink, but not melt it like a blowtorch would. I then bolt the wire to the new negative battery post, and that's the earth done. The battery positive is also done in 16mm square cable. This time I obviously use red. I use around 5 inches of new loom. I connect the butt connector at one end and a terminal on the other. Then it's crimped onto the car, then slide over 2 layers of heat shrink. I first off use the black 4:1 heat shrink, which has the glue inside, and then I go over the top with the red stuff just so it looks better. This wire is now fed through the original bulkhead grommet and bolted up to the new positive clamp. The main fuse box feed is also bolted to this, along with the shortened ECU battery positive loom. I think it looks much better than before and I'm really pleased with how well it all fits. Not only that, it should help the car be really reliable. So now the battery looms are all sorted, I can turn my attention to the rest of the engine bay wiring. So firstly, I soldered the ECU ignition feed into the Nova loom. This is really easy and it's just a case of looking for a black ignition feed wire. It's in the near side where the original coil would be. This section's then all finished off with a tester tape. This is cloth tape and it gives a really nice factory look. I then clip up the rest of the slam panel loom. Right, excuse the sweating, it's a very hot muggy day in England. I'm going to fit some water pipes now. Start with the heat matrix pipes. The one behind the inlet manifold is really tight, but we do get it on. I then move to the bleed hose that comes off the back of the throttle body and then tees into the header tank. I'm going to be honest, this was an absolute nightmare and I should have done it when the engine was out, but never mind. I use a flexi 1/4 inch extension with a 7mm socket to tighten it up. I don't like using screwdrivers on these clips because you can damage the ends, and I just think it gives a better overall finish if you use a socket. I then fit the hose that goes from the plastic L-shaped rear pipe to the header tank, and then I fit the bottom hose. The hose actually needed cutting down a bit because the radiator was no longer in the original place and we moved it more to the centre. I did this to allow the intercooler to fit. I then connected the turbo water outlet to the T-piece that also connects the blue pipes together. Right, that's all the hoses on I think. Now it's time to put the rad in. The radiator is a really tight fit now. It nearly touches the compressor housing on the turbo, so I have to be really careful. Once it's in and seated in the grommets, I connect the top hose and the bleed hose from the top of the rad to the water feed on the turbo. Originally this would have gone straight to the header tank, but it now has to run through the turbo and it also tees into the bleed pipes. Right, that is all the hoses fitted, which means I can fill it with coolant. However, we do have one slight problem, and that is this. So this is a temperature switch for the radiator. So when this gets to a certain temperature, the fan will kick in. So normally that'll just fit in there like so. But the problem we have is the intercooler's here. So that's going to foul it. So what I want to do, because I want to keep this working, so I want to cut the end of this off and then solder 2 bits of wire to the end of them pins. So basically it sticks out less. And hopefully I can make some kind of multi-plug what goes on here. And away we go. So I've just soldered 2 little leads on the end, like I said I would. Put a bit of heat shrink on. And just to prove that it worked, at the minute, it's basically high resistance. You watch that, that should drop. Should go to 0. There you go. That's working perfectly. And there we go, the finished thing. I've put some heat shrink on it and I've also sealed the end with some RTV. Right, so we've got a new copper washer. And I'm just going to carefully put it on. Once tightened up, I connect the bloom up using bullet crimps. One of the wires is live, so always use the female insulated crimp on these to avoid short circuits if it's unplugged. A pet hate of mine is coloured terminals. I really can't stand them, so I always colour them with heat shrink. I think it makes the repair or modification look nearly factory, and it also takes your eye off it as it's no longer a bright colour. And that is finished, and I think that looks pretty damn good if I do say so myself. Right, as you can see, it's very tight. The rad's in. I can now fit the intercooler. And the stay bar, which I've painted, and I've also put some foam tape on the back to stop it rattling. I made the stay a tight fit on purpose to prevent the intercooler from rattling on the radiator. The foam tape just helps everything sandwich together nicely. Right guys, so we're going to move on to the boost pipe. So first off, we're going to fit this dump valve to the top of the top hat. I've already kind of started mocking up where the pipes are going to go. I've got some 45s and I've got some straights, etc. So it shouldn't be too hard to do this. I clamp the dump valve to the top hat via a T-piece. Then I fit the cut down 45-degree hose to the bottom of the intercooler. This is just put on loosely until the aluminium 45 is fitted and joined up to the dump valve via a length of straight hose. It's getting really tight now, so I've got to be super careful where I put the hose clips because there's very little space to tighten them up. Once everything's fitted, go around and tighten all the clips up. I think the overall look of this is really good and it didn't actually cost that much to pull it off. The compressor housing to the intercooler is made of a couple of 90s joined together with a small section of stainless steel pipe. Again, it's a tight fit but should flow pretty well. So this is the original Nova wiring for the fan, and I need to join it to the aftermarket fan. Right, so black on a Vauxhall's an ignition feed, and the brown with the white trace will be an earth. So the brown and white needs to go to the black, and this blue needs to go to this black. A little bit complicated, but hey hey. I cut the plug off and stripped the wires back using these Irwin strippers. They're a great tool for anybody who does a bit of DIY wiring. They're so much easier to use than side cutters. These are then crimped up and insulated accordingly. And that is that done. I'm just going to clip it up out of the way now, and the fan should now work. So guys, that is pretty much under the bonnet now sorted. I've put some water in it just to kind of check the system, make sure there's no leaks, flush it out, then I'll put antifreeze in at a later date. All the pipes are connected, radiator's sorted, intercooler's all sorted, wiring's all sorted. So I think we're pretty much ready to start the next thing, which is the exhaust. However, this video has been long enough, so I'm going to wrap it up here. And then next week we'll be making the downpipe. So stay tuned for more. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. See you later. Bye bye.